I think we are facing right now an opportunity for disruption.
नमक शमक नमक शमक डाल देते हैं नमक शमक Hi, I'm Harpal Singh Sokhi and you're listening to the Ed Show.
Welcome to that show, a podcast where I sit with some amazing personalities from across sectors and borders to have meaningful conversation on topics that matters to us. Welcome back. My guest for the day is someone who is an expert at the higher level to the executive leadership on how children and adults learn through play. He is someone who has spent 9 years in building the research agenda and organizational expertise on children's development, play, and learning, and has published widely on the same topics. He has been a visiting scholar at the MIT Media Lab in Boston and an advisor to various international research organizations, including the University of Cambridge Peddle Research Center, the Torrance Centre for Creativity, Design for Play in Denmark, and more. He is the chair of Learning Through Play at Lego Foundation. He is Bo Stjerne Thomsen. Hi, Bo. Welcome on the show.
Thank you very much.
Bo, you are one person who walk and talk learning through play, and we have always kept play and learning in two different buckets. How do you connect both?
I connect both because children connect both very naturally from they're born. And the way they do it is that they learn when they are actively engaged in things. They actually do things, they try out things, experiment, and they actually enjoy doing it. They enjoy learning new things, even when it's challenging. So when I connect play and learning, it's because the way that we have children have developed through evolution is that they naturally explore and test, try out things to be able to develop not only their understanding of knowledge, like language and mathematics, but also practical skills like collaborating or being creative. So play and learning has been separated a little bit in terms of the terminology, but in terms of the science of how children learn and play, and all the way into adults, it's actually very integrated.
I believe that learning through play can stimulate various senses and also activate various brain functions that many of us don't understand. Can you throw some light on this fact and why activating these senses and brain functions is necessary for a child's development?
Absolutely. So the critical mechanism to learn is to activate as much of your brain simultaneously in a good, positive way. And people have naturally talked about the brain as either left, right, or particular kind of areas of the brain that are stimulated. But what's reality is that the brain organized in networks, different types of networks with different functions. And means it's a whole brain that basically needs to be stimulated for you to be able to understand, remember, and practice things. And when you're playful, you have multiple senses activated. You see things, which is one part of your brain. You touch things with one part of stimuli. You might smell it, you might hear it, and it means that multiple part of your brain is stimulated at the same time. If what play does is that it keeps you actively engaged, so you do things by observing, focusing, testing, and trying out things. And when that happens, you are actually activating your full brain, and it actually tests and try out different functions. And it means that you remember things deeper, you remember things for longer. So when children are born, they have neurons in their brain, but they're only connected by experience. If you don't have an experience, you cannot learn. And the better and deeper and richer that experience with multiple senses and your attention, the more you are able to learn it.
Though, as far as our present education system is concerned, we always say that it is killing creativity and eventually brainwashing our youth to get in line with herd mentality. How do you see learning through play actually empowering our people to help them make the right decisions for their career and life instead of allowing them to blindly follow others?
Certainly, there is this tendency of education to focus narrowly on specific outcomes like understanding the curriculum or the science or the math or the language. And what we advocate for is a broader skills focus into education because that's what's needed in the workplace and what people ask for. So when we look at the workplace nowadays, it requires not to memorize particular kind of knowledge. It requires you to creatively find new solutions, to collaborate with others, to critically reflect on whether this information is true or false and whether it's useful. So actually, education should be about supporting these broader skills and not only narrow academic skills. The key thing is it's not in contradiction or opposition to each other, because you actually need knowledge to be creative. You need to understand or dive into something that interests you, whether a particular topic of in the environment or mathematics or science. But you need to be allowed to come up with multiple ideas to solve the problem or to approach that idea. So what we say is actually knowledge and these skills that we need with creativity and critical thinking and so forth are actually supported through high engagement of the student, and they can actually complement each other. So, education shouldn't be only about academic and knowledge. It should be integrated with us, allowing to collaborate with others, being able to test an experiment and come up with multiple ideas.
I always say that it's better to design your own path instead of following others' footsteps. But what we see in our education system is that our system is equipped to force our pupil to follow herd mentality. Don't you feel that it becomes difficult for teachers to change their approach, as first it is difficult to embrace change, and secondly our system is the biggest roadblock towards this change?
There's certainly a systems roadblock, which is the main focus of the Lego Foundation work also. Um, and it's also a roadblock of tradition in terms of how I was taught in school. It's not necessarily what I need to teach others as an adult. One of the main roadblocks is basically the aims of education. So it cannot only be about knowledge and curriculum; it needs to embrace these broader skills. So when we are in school, the teacher needs to be supported in saying they should not only remember the things that are in the lecture, but they should also be incentivized to collaborate and think creatively. So one of the roadblocks is to ensure that our aims of education is broader to include these type of skills. In terms of the teachers, one of the main challenges is that sometimes you think about teaching as instruction, only teaching one way from the classroom, or free play or open ended projects. And one of the key things we found from research is that what the teachers uniquely can do is to balance different approaches. Instructions is sometimes good to get started at the beginning of a lecture, like 5-10 minutes, get everyone on the same page. Uh, then you can gradually go into projects or guidance with themes. Say, what if we can think about a solution to a robot driving 10 meters? How do you measure that? What is the friction? Let's try to build one. Or what is an approach to think about the climate and sustainability? So more small, narrow topics with themes that guide children's interest. Or you can have open-ended project, particular times where children say, let's go explore, let's figure out what are an interesting problem or question or things you can make. The good educators are the ones who can use different approaches. They can both instruct, they can also guide particular kind of collaborative projects, and they can also support reflection in free open-ended projects. And that's a big shift. It's a big shift from a teacher to say, I don't need to know everything and I don't need to instruct. I can actually also guide and reflect, and I can actually support feedback. If we can do that, if we can change the understanding of the aims of education to be broader skills and embedded that in our education and the way we assess much broadly, and at the same time incentivize support the teacher's development in teaching towards these, then the student will also be more engaged and more enjoy learning for a longer time, and they won't stop learning when school is done. They'll keep being passionate about developing their skills and seek new information.
Now we know that each individual has its own unique learning style, and when we talk about different learning styles, we have always seen that teachers struggle in order to strike a right balance between 40 to 50 students with individual learning styles. Do you feel that learning through play can be a mechanism through which teachers can empower every stakeholder instead of following different methodologies or approaches?
It can definitely. So some of the empirical studies we've seen, which means looking at the outcomes of approaches that use learning through play, deliberately talks about how this can reach more children and different types of children. And the main reasoning is it's a more flexible approach. You're not saying that each child should be taught in every child should be taught in the same way, but you can adjust your instruction or the materials depending on the child. So the key thing with learning styles is, are important. But the most important thing is that each child do not learn in completely different ways. They actually learn quite similar in the ways that they learn through experiences. So they all need kind of rich, stimulating environments where they can actively engage with materials and technologies. They are all, supported if they are okay to try new things out, not necessarily following the same path and allowed to fail sometimes, and they all learn if they can get feedback from others. So that's why we ask to focus on 5 characteristics that are really inherent to how a child develop the skills and learn through play, which is being actively engaged, enjoy learning the things even when it's challenging, and being able to engage in things that are meaningful for the individual child, because children have different interests, and that you can socially interact with others and allow to test and try out different things. So learning styles, you need to think about the core of what learning is, and then you can flexible adjust that approach.
Do you feel that it can also support people with learning disabilities?
It definitely comes from that realm of research and education. So the key thing of let's say children of different needs is that you need to think about different approaches that work for that child. It still needs to be actively engaging. So you need to think about how does this relate to a child being able to express their ideas and how they're learning, and how is it meaningful in terms of the topics, the interests, their past experiences. But learning the special needs means also sometimes some children need more instruction and more constrained and more structure, where other can be easily adaptive to open-ended projects or diving into completely new areas of work. So I think it's more the way that the pedagogy, the amount of choice you're able to give children, and how you balance that choice with your own kind of direction. So some children are very confident in making own choices right away, and some children need to be helped in making own choices.
Bo, in scenarios like today's, when we are talking about online classrooms, or in certain countries, we are talking about the hybrid model,
Mm.
don't you feel that online or hybrid mode of delivery can create hurdles when we are talking about learning through play?
There have been really good examples over the past couple of months now with hybrid learning, and the ones that do that well is because they are able to balance time between instruction or online streaming and independent work of the students, and they've been able to harvest the interest and the things that are meaningful for children's own environment, and build on that instead of necessarily thinking about the school as a starting point. So, not online education only with technology will not resolve the challenges we have right now, but being able to use technologies for teachers to tune in on what are the interests of children right now in the actual home environment they're in or in the community. How can they being able to support more frequent interactions of chat and comments, so that kind of work, and how can they support with more independent projects. So it is a huge opportunity to say, you know let's develop a project around one thing you find challenging in your home, and try to solve that using mathematics and language and science. And you can find interest and inspiration by connecting with your peers, with your friends in school, using online. So what you've seen is blended learning with the flexibility of time, less rigid in curriculum and structure, and more independence to students, actually are better equipped to be able to talk about a balance of knowledge and skills and high engagement.
When we talk about the play or learning through play, then we often categorize it with younger people. Don't you feel that it is equally important for adults?
Absolutely, and I would say the evidence support that too. So the key point here again, when we define learning through play, we don't necessarily say play as a word. Sometimes play is often thought of as something that's frivolous, outside, only by own choice, or it's something only for young children. But actually, the characteristics about learning through play, about being active and having choices and allowed to experiment, is something not only for younger children, it's inherently needed now in education, and it's something that is part of the everyday workplace. So when I go to work, I am allowed to make own choices in terms of the outcomes I'm gonna reach. I have to find out new solutions to how I can reach these outcomes, and I have to work collaboratively with others. So it means that actually, when we measure things as how well do you do in the workplace, how do you feel good at the workplace, we ask the questions about, do you really enjoy learning new things? Are you actively engaged? Are you testing and trying out different ways of collaborating with others? So what we've seen is that the same type of characteristics that apply to effective ways of learning as a young child applies equally throughout childhood and into adults. It just looked different. In school, it looks more like projects, a problem-based learning, inquiry-based, experiential learning. It's less a type of play, like I build with Lego bricks, I climb trees, I do games. It's more integrated with the school. And similar, when you go to an adult and go in the workplace, well, you are allowed to work on independent projects. You have to figure out what are the key outcomes and find creative solutions. It's just look a little bit different in the format, and the complexity is different. But learning to play can be applied from young to old.
Now, when we are talking about the workforce environment, don't you feel that school is also a workplace? I agree that we often categorize it as an education delivery atmosphere, but for the teaching and non teaching staff, it is a workplace, right?
Absolutely. I think that's a very, very good point. Sometimes we have thought about classrooms or schools as these artificial environments that prepare children with knowledge so they're capable of, being educated and come into the workplace. But actually, the reality is very, very different right now. We need to think about how the workplace looks right now and how that can be part of real life experiences in school. So school is, to some degree, a workplace in the sense that it's a contemporary workplace. You actually can use outdoor experiences. You can work with real life practical challenges, whether it's community challenges, whether it's something from a local company, whether it's something in your spare time. So the real life practical examples to use that as part of school education have been even more important, because then you are required not only to think about what you learn in terms of the knowledge you remember, but also how do you apply it to actually find meaningful applications and practical purpose. And that will equip them not only with a meaningful education and a purpose, but with practical skills and high engagement.
We are talking about the skills that the workplace requires now. With this economic shift, when we are talking about new economies or preparing our people for green or gig economies, what do you feel are some of the skills that our people may need tomorrow, and how learning through play can actually stimulate those skills?
So that has been heavily investigated over the past years, and there are some really good studies from the World Economic Forum who maps what are the key skills that the workplace is requesting in terms of critical thinking and creativity, for instance, in terms of more complex analytical skills, in terms of working with others and having more empathy towards others. And what's less is to remember key facts and figures and math and reading and more traditional ways of factory work. Um, I think that what learning through play can do is exactly to develop these skills, to think more creatively, to be able to collaborate with others, to be able to critically reflect on what you're doing as part of the process. But what's really the unique thing right now is that children need to be able to adapt to change. Everyone needs to adapt to change. And when you're able to learn through play, you're actually able to explore the opportunities to learn new things depending on the need, because it's a more flexible approach. So when we have a new situation right now, you have to deal with how can I learn in different ways? How can I adjust my workplace? How can I adapt different types of structures and new habits? And the only way to do that is to think creatively about how you can change things. Oh, maybe I can do this a little different. Maybe I'm able to structure my work like this. Maybe I can approach a project like this. So play gives you this adaptable mindset that allows you to approach change with creativity and use active engagement, experimentation, and enjoy learning new things as an approach to be able to develop these skills. So it's much more needed than ever in our ability to be resilient and cope with this change.
One thing which I have seen, and I'm sure that you have also seen or realized, is that how we have been forced to look upon certain industries for pursuing our career. And even today, kids are being pressurized to be a part of those industries. With this, we now also have new companies coming up selling programs like
Yeah.
coding and are trying to make coding new engineering. Don't you feel that without creativity, learning programs like coding or
Mm.
similar programs are actually forcing our people to be a part of certain predefined industries? And it is actually like asking them to walk aimlessly.
I wouldn't put it as hard as that, but certainly what uh, as coding as an example, there's both a way to teach coding and apply coding. And I think the approaches that stimulates longer interest in things like coding is when it's done creatively. When you are actually engaged in testing and trying out different ways of code, from small experiments with a robot, testing things with the games, and increasingly testing out more sophisticated ways of pulling word blocks together, begin to write code. So we will call it more creative coding approaches when you are learning it. But the way coding is applied is also being more sophisticated. So you need to be much more aware of what are the ethical implications, what are the practical implications into a physical robot or into how it influenced people's lives. So coding is much more about the societal implications of that skill of coding. So there's both in the way we teach coding and the way it's being applied is it being used much more broadly now.
Now, when we talk about learning through play in an educational institution or at workplace environment, it is still confined at a local level. Uh, do you think that it is also possible to rethink at a broader spectrum, let's say, how two different educational institutions or organizations in two different countries can actually collaborate and explore something through learning through play?
Absolutely. I think we are facing right now an opportunity for disruption across the not only schools but higher education. And this period in time has forced education institutions to rethink not only who are their customers, but also to which way they're going to reach their content. And in many places around the world, content is quite similar in the basic format of it. And higher education need to be rethinking how they can support and deliver to a much broader customer base. But it will still be required that it's done through more flexible platforms. So the online platforms with active engagement, where students for any background can pick their own kind of topics and can cluster that together in a portfolio, will be kind of a more adaptive way of going forward with these type of platforms. And I think it will be difficult for any higher education institutions in the future to rely on students coming to a university or college for 5 years in a row. Students and adults, as lifelong learners, would pick and choose from different type of sources, partly physical, partly online, and will be supported in creating their own kind of portfolio because they will switch jobs much more frequently also throughout lives.
When we talk about global citizenship or inclusion or diversity, one thing that I have seen is the mindset that our previous generations have nurtured with during their lifespan, and the way they actually try to enforce the same mindset on our younger generations. And with this, we have also seen challenges and disturbances across countries. Don't you feel that our educational delivery mechanism should change in a way that we talk more of collaboration instead of separation?
Everything points to increased collaboration, definitely. But collaboration in a way that we don't need to do the same things, but we need to be much better at exchanging views, having greater humility and modesty towards each others, and much more curiosity into what are local differences, where do people come from when they say particular things, and how do people find ways to express what they say and do, so we can bring forth the differences and talk about these. So collaboration here is an opportunity to talk about differences and collaborate on joint challenges, which are needed right now when we are in the midst of both health challenge, climate challenge, economic challenge, and new technology disruption. So I definitely thought there's a call out for global citizenships to collaborate more, but in respect and humility and modesty for individual and cultural differences.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, when we are talking about the skills, now what we have seen is that we have a kind of hindrance or a roadblock that we are facing today in a way of fake or inappropriate information access through online resources. and our pupil consume such inappropriate or irrelevant information. And now, when we talk about learning through play, do you feel that it can enhance skills such as reasoning or analytical skills so that they can actually understand and be able to differentiate between appropriate or inappropriate information?
That's a very good question. I think it's one of the crucial questions that everyone are thinking about right now, and we are actually trying to push more research in that area also now, in digital use, in digital well-being, in ethics. It is one of the key anchoring points that we need to figure out ways to do. And I don't think there's any specific solution at this point beyond, as I think mentioned before, that we need to be able to reality check and share views and perspectives before we make decisions. So just because I get one particular video, I cannot make a judgment upon that content or that video, that fact, unless I just find humility and say, where does that come from? Who was the sender? What are the sources? What would other people think about this? So it requires a more social approach to content and technology, much more critical thinking, obviously, in terms of saying how was that developed, who was the sender, and so forth. But the particular ways we can develop good guidelines around it and facilitate that dialogue is still something to be explored.
Well, there are many things that need more exploration, and I'm certain about that. And with this, what are your views on our education system? Don't you feel that it is the time to change our orthodox teaching approach, and we might need to evolve with new methodologies and the new approach that can help us nurture our people for tomorrow instead of preparing them for past?
I think the key point in terms of our education is we need to think about it not as a standardized form of education where we can equip any child with the same skills and the same like narrow path towards a future of success. We need to equip children to make their own decisions, to be able to find their own path and navigate new choices, what to learn and how to learn, not only in school, but after school. I think that will be the difficulty. If we already know exactly what a child should learn at the age of 9 and 12 in school, then we are setting them up for failure. But if we instead think about supporting them in making good decisions, being able to learn new things and being more adaptable, and making their own choices as they find their way into higher education, into work life, that's equipping them as independent, creative, engaged, lifelong learners, and that will be needed. So in that case, it's much more about scaffolding that learning process and being able to support that tutoring and feedback instead of necessarily knowing this is how the future is going to look like.
When we talk about the correlation between school and higher education and the quality of our educators, I actually feel it as a domino effect. As when we are not disrupting in our school education system, then we are always blaming that our teachers are not ready to learn. And what we don't realize is that our teachers are actually the byproduct of our higher education. Don't you feel that even our higher education is not equipped to produce quality teachers?
Yeah, I think we need to think about everyone as part of a system, and teachers have been educated and are very skilled in the profession of teaching, but it's highly influenced in the expectations that a parent have. So we see that parents do still increasingly have expectations to academic excellence alone, and not about creativity and critical thinking and collaboration. So teachers need to be helped by parents who demand that my students, my children, are also ethical, responsible, or collaborative, can come up with new ideas. And secondly, as we said from the other side, from a more top down, governments need to recognize that teachers operate under the guidelines of a curriculum or the assessments that are put in place. So one cannot expect teachers to be creative and highly engaging in their teaching styles if the main accountability is towards a narrow curriculum only knowledge, very strict lectures, 45 minutes, or standardized assessments. So there needs to be more flexibility in thinking about the broader skills. And finally, then teachers themselves, yeah, it is a much more adaptable practice to be a teacher nowadays. And I've tried myself, and I would say that it is complex. It is very different needs. And this ability in your ongoing professional development to be supported, that instruction cannot make it alone any longer. Your own knowledge. You need to be able to respond to students individually. And if you have 40 students, you need to be able to cluster in groups, do project based work, more independent work, where you guide with themes and critical questions And sometimes you have open-ended projects where children have more independence and choice and develop their creativity and own self-regulation. So the professional development of teachers is a broader, more integrated pedagogy, as we say, that will be able to fit both the parent needs and expectations and the government system. So that it is a systems challenge that we are trying to address right now also to move towards a common goal that to equip children with a broader set of skills that are much more relevant for the work life and community nowadays, which includes a combination of knowledge skills and definitely a high engagement to keep learning for the rest of one's life.
We always have and we will face system challenges, and it is the case with every industry. But pertaining to the education industry, when our teachers are underpaid or are not being respected, then despite of having resources, they lack the will to perform better or to learn something new, or they even lose respect for their institution or even profession. And I personally believe that it is their right to be respected and to be paid well.
Yeah.
Now, how do you see learning through play can actually enhance their skill set in a way that they can lead a more respectable and professional life?
Yeah. That's a very good question. It is one of the key challenges we also hear, particularly in areas of more socioeconomic differences and challenges. Like if the teacher profession is not respected as one of the most important disciplines of society and is not honored and paid with the same kind of responsibility, then it's very difficult to find and nurture these experiences among a teacher. So we need to recognize teachers, whether they're teachers in school, whether they're teachers in preschool and pedagogues, which are even maybe even more important because that's where the main development learning happens among child. They need to be respected and paid for that, similar to any other professions. Then in terms of moving, and supporting teachers at different levels, I think the core kind of ambition for a teacher is they're passionate about children's learning. They really need to be passionate about seeing a child grow, strengthen their capacities and interests. If they have that, there are different levels and support one can provide depending on the resources one have. If you come from a very resource constrained environments, you might start with easy activities, make it really help the teachers to say, these are the kind of activities that engage the whole class in something that's curriculum relevant, but you're actively engaged. You're not only passively teaching children. And gradually, you can kind of extend that into more sophisticated professional development. You can go to high-level models where you release administrative time, increase time for peer feedback among teachers, and even get external support. But I think at the lower part here, very constrained environments, it needs to be very easy for a teacher to understand how can they relate to the student and facilitate large classrooms with active engagement. And that's not impossible. You've seen the examples of that. It just requires a little more help in terms of to make it practical.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And with this, it's time to say goodbye to you, Bo. It was pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you very much. Also a pleasure. Thank you.
I hope that you all have enjoyed listening to this fun and meaningful conversation with Bo Stjerne Thomsen. If you have liked this conversation, then do rate us on Apple Podcasts and share it with your network. And we will meet again in the next episode with another amazing guest. Thank you for listening to The TEDS Show. You can now listen to the same podcast on Apple and Google Podcasts, or you can watch it live on YouTube. And I'll see you in the next episode. Till then, stay safe and stay happy.